Welcome back. Just about 25 minutes to 7 o'clock. We're going to take the direction of the conversation into the legal aspect of this. And joining us via Skype, we have attorney at law Martin George, who is going to tell us a little bit about what laws are in place that are actionable now and what the Children's Authority can do to tackle this to protect that individual child as well as others in similar situations. Mr. George, thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, good morning to you, Fain, and good morning to your viewers, and good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
So we had Inspector Roger Alexander saying on Beyond the Tape yesterday, when this video first came to public knowledge, that they were going to take action on this immediately. What can the police do should they locate these two individuals, or three if there are three adults in this scenario, and this child, in terms of punishing the abusers and protecting the child?
Well, if it is that you're speaking of a scenario where there's actual physical abuse of a child, then clearly the police can take action, because then that's a criminal act. So prima facie, the law does give that power, and the persons who are guilty of such can be charged. You have the basic laws which deal with the offenses against children, the offenses against the persons, you know, so that would cover it from that aspect. But of course, this scenario envisages something a bit wider than that, or bigger than that, in that you have a possible situation where there may be ongoing situations of repeated abuse. So I think that's where we also need to look and see where we can have some intervention.
How would the law or the police distinguish the way they treat the direct physical abuse from the male and the two onlookers, who we presume are both female?
Well, in terms of the law, you can have something which would cover a scenario such as aiding and abetting in the commission of an offense. So in other words, if you are not a direct participant, but if you have facilitated, aided, or abetted in the commission of that offense, then it can be that you would also be held liable under the law.
We heard Ms. Anna Maria Moore in just now talking about the Children's Authority perhaps needing more resources to be able to do the very important and heavy task that they have to execute in situations like this. What can they do for this child?
Well, the Children's Authority, we must remember, this is a piece of legislation that has been proclaimed since the year 2000. It has been assented to since the year 2000. So it's been on our law books for quite some time. But it appears that the nuts and bolts in terms of action in the mechanism, setting up the homes, setting up the special centers, setting up the assessment centers, I think that's where we have fallen down terribly on the job. And you now have this compounded by the fact that there's been the recent scenario where even in some of the established homes, it has been, you know, it's now clear that you may not be able to send persons there, you know. So therefore, we have not done the background work to give this Children's Authority the necessary teeth and mechanisms which can enforce the law. And that's the problem. We need to establish specialized centers where you can immediately have this child removed from the home and taken there until you have a proper assessment of the situation. You have counseling for the family members, because the way the law is structured under the Children's Authority, they do allow you to take into account factors such as the ties that the child has to those close to it. So, you know, you don't want to just necessarily break up a family, but you may, in some circumstances, have to intervene because of the needs of the child and the need to protect the child from the very ones who the child loves and the very ones who actually may love the child, but they just have a very strange and distorted way of expressing that love. And that's where the law and the society safety net has to come into place.
Is it difficult for investigators to establish a pattern of abuse in a situation like this, where you're dealing with a child who is still in Pampers, who may not be able to verbalize, to recall, who may not want to recall or recount what has happened?
Well, obviously, it's always difficult because, first of all, at that age, you have children who would necessarily always want to be innately defensive of the ones who care for them. So in other words, even if mommy or daddy is the abuser, they would still always necessarily tend to want to have some kind of protective instinct in that regard. But of course, I would imagine trained psychologists would be able to spend time with such a child and be able to, make them comfortable enough so that they can speak about it, explain what is happening, and the psychologists will be able to get them to understand that, look, telling us about the problem doesn't mean that you are necessarily putting your parents in trouble. This is for your own good. I know, in this case, the child is 2 years old, but it's not impossible to try and get that child to feel a certain level of comfort that the child can at least be able to share some experiences.
And again, of course, you're talking in terms of parents. We're not sure for certain who these adults are in the video, because we're hearing comments along the lines of the mother didn't drop the stipulated or preferred type of milk and so on. And but this may be a situation where parents have had to leave a child with caretakers, and I'm wondering, in terms of what the Children's Authority prescribes in childcare settings, are there regulations or is there any kind of registry that's stipulated by law for verifiable childcare centers to be a part of, so that parents can know that there's some kind of monitoring mechanism on these childcare centers?
Well, under the Children's Authority Act, they speak of Children's Community Residences and Foster Care and Nurseries Act 2000, right? So this, again, is legislation that has been passed. It's on the law books. But, of course, the question is, if you ask the the Division of Social Services, the Ministry of Social Services, where are these children community residences and these foster care centers and registered nurseries? I would imagine that's where the challenge lies. So while you may have things set out under the law, we have it on paper, our problem has been the implementation and actualization of these things. And I would hope that Trinidad and Tobago would use this incident and use this opportunity to make a serious call on our politicians, our leaders, to go past the talk and the rhetoric. Because in circumstances like this, what always happens, they all come out and they all say, well, this is such a terrible situation, we need to do better. But you must move beyond the talk and turn it into action. You've had persons like Stephanie Daly, Senior Counsel, who's been a major advocate for us improving our systems and social services for the care and welfare of children and the vulnerable in our society. And this is what any developed society does. You look and you measure a society by the way it takes care of the most vulnerable and the most dependent persons in the society. And I think we in Trinidad and Tobago are failing miserably in that regard.
All right, Mr. George, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you for lending your expertise to the discussion. Something that has been said many times before, that it's time to take talk and turn it into action. Will this be the catalyst? We'll see in the coming days. We have more for you coming up here on Morning Edition.